What's going on? It's Moses back again. It's been a long time since I've done this, so we'll see if I remember how to do these videos without making too many crazy mistakes. But today I wanted to touch on Peacemaker as a coach because the news just came out that Misfits is going to loan him over to Tyloo for the next two events, for the major qualifier and for ESL One Cologne. And that was just announced this morning. And obviously there's a lot of jokes, a lot of negative feelings associated with Peacemaker as a coach. So I kind of wanted to go through some of his career at the start and give some of my thoughts on those situations, and then kind of touch on what he's going to be able to bring to Tyloo. So we'll start first off is like when he kind of became known to the community. He took over for Zeus. When Zeus went to Luminosity, that would become SK. He became the coach of them, and Peacemaker kind of filled in his spot as the coach of, I believe at that point they were Games Academy and eventually would become Tempo Storm. Um, Now, if you'll remember after this, Tempo Storm was like the second best team in Brazil. No one kind of really knew what kind of effort, like no one really at the time imagined that a second Brazilian team would be able to have impact on the international stage. So a couple things that we have to note in his leadership is one, he obviously took over the foundation of what Zeus had been working on, and we're seeing now that Zeus is a very, very capable, very talented coach. But still, under Peacemakers tutelage, this team went on. They did first place at the Civo Gfinity tournament, which was a huge accomplishment. I think that was this core's first big tournament victory was there. That included a best of five win over Virtus Pro in the semifinals. No small feat. This isn't the Virtus Pro that we're seeing now. That's a little bit weakened. That as question marks of their map pool, question marks of if they can actually still compete. But this was at a time when Virtus Pro was still performing pretty intimidating at the time. So a best of five win over them is huge, especially for a team that's outmatched in talent most likely at that time, but also just question marks about a team rising up. One of the big deficiencies we always see in those next tier teams is their map pool. So to win a best of five is actually a huge accomplishment. That was in the semifinals. They went on to beat SK, and that's not the Brazilian SK. This was SK. I think this is the one that had Magisk and Freeze and some of those guys over in that lineup. But they were able to win another best of five win. And also at this event, they had a BO3 win over Dignitas, which again was the Dignitas that would eventually become North. Not the very same lineup, but I mean they had MSL, they had Config still, and then they had KRB and they had Rubino. So a lot of big name players from the Danish scene were still on this roster. It was still a pretty intimidating team. That was a team that was kind of stuck in the tier two that was on the rise for quite some time. But obviously you can see the skill level of some of the players they had. Still a pretty impressive win for Tempo Storm at that time. They also went on to get second place at DreamHack Austin. This was underneath Peacemaker as well. They did a BO1 over Liquid. They won a best of three over Cloud9, and basically they outplaced all the best of North America, only losing to Luminosity, who would win that event. And with these two placings at these two tournaments, they climbed to eighth in the world rankings on HLTV. Which is pretty huge to kind of come out of nowhere like that. So a very good run there. That was kind of Peacemaker at the helm in the coaching role. And you're always going to have questions about how much a coach actually does. And he took over, for Zeus. So how much was Peacemaker able to implement? But still, you cannot deny that these results under his coaching, that's when these kind of occurred. Especially when you back it up with his time in Liquid. He joins that team. They went to the semifinals of MLG Columbus. He joins after that. And under his coaching, they go to the grand finals of ESL One Cologne 2016. That was a major. The first time a North American team had ever reached a major. They had best of three wins over Navi, over Fnatic. And obviously, I mean, let's just get it out in the open. They had Simple as a substitute at the time, and without Simple, they probably don't make the grand finals, even with Peacemaker. But regardless, I mean, Peacemaker as a coach, and also at this time being able to in-game lead, big impact in his preparation and his in-game leading. Because you'll remember, two of the big questions that this Team Liquid team always had for some time was, the opping question, and then the leadership question was just as big. It just kind of gets overshadowed by the sense of having, a superstar in Simple. This is also the tournament where Elige kind of got to a next level under Peacemaker's calling. And then following that up, they got a third to fourth at ESL One New York with wins over G2. They also beat Fnatic twice on Dust 2 in two separate best of ones. But still, when you look at these, I mean, obviously there's going to be those extra circumstances going into those events of simple at ESL and Cologne, just BO1s at New York, but still under Peacemaker, that's kind of these are things that you can't really take away from the accomplishments of a coach, no matter what the factors are. Especially because managing simple in a team like that, that's no easy task, and being able to kind of control him, and you'll see simple has gained a lot of respect for Peacemaker at this time. Has always spoken highly of Peacemaker after his departure from Team Liquid. So that's a very cool thing. So impressive runs here at these two tournaments for Team Liquids, and then before that Tempo Storm. And one of the big things that has always been a consistent story, despite some of the struggles that Peacemakers had as a coach. There's always been one consistent. Incredibly hardworking and very good at the analytical side of things, at the work that goes into being a coach before the matches begin. And as we saw, I mean, even in Team Liquid at ESL One Cologne, probably being the brunt of the in-game leading when coaches were still allowed to talk during the round. But still, he leaves Liquid not necessarily on the greatest notes, but not like a terrible note that we've seen from some of his other endeavors after this. There were always stories of his clashing with players. His personality is noted to be one that can be abrasive at times, especially in the context of coaching and Counter Strike theory. But even the release from Team Liquid after Peacemaker's departure was incredible job that he does in terms of the gameplay, in terms of Counter Strike, in terms of preparing, in terms of setting an example as a hardworking coach. And the disagreements mostly came, it was stated in the release, which is mostly business side of things. Now, obviously, that's being generous because we know some of the friction that was between the players, but still, you cannot deny his ability to impact how a team plays in game with some of these massive results. He goes on to Energy right after this. You'll remember. And this was a very short-lived stint. I think this was like 2 or 3 weeks. And most of this was because, in my opinion, looking at it from the outside, this is kind of like a crazy concept. It was a very cool project when it was announced, was that he would essentially be the coach and general manager of Energy moving forward. And he would essentially build a whole new team. Now, kind of a cool concept. You'll remember Energy at the time had, Gabi, they had Lagia, they had Tapson. I think Peter was in that team, yeah. And I mean, they had this team, and Fugly as well. And it was kind of like this was at the point where it was basically announced that the Germans would be heading back to Europe, where they were kind of done with this experiment of playing in the North American Pro League. They hadn't really accomplished a whole lot. Um, and they wanted to go back home and they started up their own project, their own team big, which is thriving right now, which is doing a really really good job. But you have to realize this is a huge undertaking of a project. I don't necessarily blame Peacemaker for this kind of a situation because I think NRG as the organization probably bit off more than they could chew, saying you get to build us a whole new team, and then all of a sudden coming in and realizing that to get the players needed to be as successful as they wanted, massive amounts of money have to be invested. You have to do buyouts. You have to go out and get certain star players. Peacemaker as the kind of coach who wants to have the exact he knows exactly what tools he wants and he needs to get them to make his system work. That's a massive undertaking, and I think that was kind of where that fell apart. And NRG just went back, and Peter had been dropped when Peacemaker came in. And NRG went back and got Daps, Peter, Fugly. I think Breezy and Mark E were the other two players at the time that came into this team. But they went back to that core, so very short-lived. I can't criticize too much because I think that's a kind of an insane situation. But regardless, obviously the organization and Peacemaker didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. Next, he went on to OpTic, which is, at the time he joined with Hiko, and Hiko came over from Team Liquid in the Stanislaw trade. And OpTic at this time is just kind of a mess. They got 9th to 12th in DreamHack Vegas underneath him. They got 11th and 12th at Katowice under his coaching. And he kind of coached after Stanislaw left as the in-game leader. And also during this time, remember, this is when there were also rumors of Mixwell and Rush leaving. So this OpTic team is kind of a mess at the point where he takes over. Now, a lot of the players talk about how and even his release that he had when he left this team was a lot of the players didn't agree with how I wanted to run the team with my kind of theory of Counter Strike for OpTic. Um, he says, I didn't really I did not have enough time to show the guys what I'm capable of, but in their eyes, my coaching style does not match what they are looking for. Fair play. But we also have to think at the time, obviously, this is a pretty rough thing after Energy coming into OpTic and then leaving OpTic very, very soon after two very poor placings. And at the time, it seems terrible. At the time, it's just like something is fundamentally wrong with Peacemaker. But we can use hindsight now and looking back on this time period of OpTic's history and the fact that OpTic still hasn't recovered from Stanislaw leaving. This is still a team that, they have hazed in as a trial coach who they haven't signed on full time as a coach, who wants to play. So they're thinking of having him step in as a player, an in-game leader. They're thinking of, you keeping him as a coach and trying to find another in-game leader. He might not even stay as coach, and they need to find a fifth player anyways. But they've had this experiment with Jason R as an in-game leader. That didn't work. He goes back towards streaming. This team has just been kind of in shambles, and from the outside, OpTic looks like they're just barely holding it together. To me, it feels like they're one very bad tournament away, one maybe personal disagreement from just breaking up this whole team. Because you have to imagine this whole every player on that team is just like kind of on pins and needles, just ready to blow a gasket with the kind of stress of it's now been 5 months since they've had an actual roster that they know they'll move forward into the future with, and that's a terrible way to play. That's a terrible way to try and improve and try and do well at events. Massive stress on all these players. So with Peacemaker fitting in, I think if he had gotten the time, he probably would have improved this team to a certain degree, and maybe it wouldn't have worked with Hiko. Maybe they would have had to go and find another person. But this team kind of hasn't even really figured out over the course of 5 months what they want, much less how are you going to tell a coach what you want if you don't even know yourself. So I imagine there was some friction between some of the stars of that team, not wanting to do the things that Peacemaker was trying to implement, and he kind of gets battered around. So these are two situations where Peacemaker joins Energy and joins OpTic, where the organization and the teams are in shambles or completely non-existent, not even real teams in both of these situations that he's being asked to improve. And that's very, very difficult to do as a coach. And yeah, I'm certain that there are things that could have done better, but still, I don't vilify Peacemaker for either of those kind of situations. Moving on from the OpTic side of things, he joins Misfits. And this is probably the most damning stop of his as a coach. The probably the period of coaching that he has that you can most easily criticize because it was marked by some bad decisions, and what looked like from the outside of trying to do too much too quickly. Now, the impressive part is over at DreamHack Tours, under his coaching, he had joined them in the gaming house just I think a week or so before DreamHack they left for DreamHack Tours. They got BO3 wins over Heroic, which is not a bad tier two team to have a win over. That's much improved from some of the misfits we've seen in the past, and also a BO3 win over Navi, and even a struggling Navi that doesn't look super super strong, still very very impressive for. Um, for a team that we haven't seen basically do anything since I don't even know. I mean, even if you go back to when these guys were in Echo Fox, but under with Sean and Shazam, they didn't really do much. But they've got some promising young players as well. And this is where it all kind of falls apart. The minors coming up, the North American minor to qualify for the PGL Major. Sean's wedding is announced, or it was on it's announced on the weekend of Sean's wedding, so he's going to be gone. Which is pretty crippling to lose your in-game leader right when you're about to qualify for the minor or try and qualify for the major. But the decision that really screws things up, that really vilifies Peacemaker, is dropping Shazam right before the major qualifier. And the reason this is such an issue, I mean, if you know me or followed, there's been some Twitter episodes and there's been some things on broadcast. I have no real love for Shazam as a player, as a person, whatever it might be. I don't especially as a player, I don't really think he's like super, super crazy impactful. I don't think he's like this necessary player. But one of the big things he had, probably one of his best LAN performances I've ever seen against Navi at DreamHack Tours, also under Peacemaker. So it's very confusing to me why Peacemaker decided to drop Shazam, just the week leading up to the major. And especially the emphasis of someone being on a team house in order to prepare is not a great decision to drop them right before, an event of such magnitude. Brings in ZQK, who, to my knowledge, hasn't really played international competitively in some time. Um, someone who's going to be coming in rusty, someone who's going to be in a whole new team, feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Even when he was in a team back in Luminosity, I mean, it was shown that yeah, the players back then believed that he could be a star player and believed that he had this incredible amount of skill. But Fallen turns out to be a much better opper than he was as the primary opper. So even when he was in a squad that is now one of the best teams in the world, he didn't have great impact. So a little bit curious there, and those are the questions. That's the big one that I just like can't wrap my head around why that was a thing. And that's where I think he's trying to do too much too fast, where you have to kind of take steps. And I think that was the big mistake he does here. And obviously, when you drop one of the star players of a team right before the biggest qualifier of the year, and then you don't qualify on top of that, you're just gone. Like there's really you leave no other option to the Misfits organization. So he gets kind of booted as coach. And now we can move towards like, I mean, enough for the history lesson portion, but we can move towards he's on loan over to Tyloo for the next two events for the qualifier or for the main qualifier of PGL and for ESL One Cologne. And this is where I think we can see some cool things at a Peacemaker. This is where we can talk a little bit more positively about him, because one of the things that we touched on earlier is his preparation, is his ability, his analytical side of Counter Strike, is going to be huge for this team. And to be frank, this is all that he's really going to have time to do. He has a week before, or not even a week. He's got a few days before the major qualifier begins, and then really Cologne is where you're probably going to see the majority of his impact as analytics. And this is kind of telling these guys what to expect, telling these guys where they can find openings and rounds. So I think the Tyloo players, they don't really have a set idea of how to play, so that information is going to be very helpful. And what I hope to happen in this kind of two event stretch for Peacemaker and Tyloo is that they kind of realize, how good of an analysis he can provide and the kind of information he can give them and the kind of steps forward that he can show them so that they bring him on into a full capacity role because he has two big strengths that I think are going to help Tyloo massively if he's brought on full time. One is he does have a very strict like discipline adherence to how he wants to play. He is a little bit more of a dictator in-game leader, which by the way, the fact that he likes to be that as a coach, he likes to have his set ways and set systems. I don't think him coming in as a coach for Misfits was really going to work with Sean anyways because they both kind of are those systematic coaches that have their way of playing the game and they want everyone to kind of fit into that. And I think we would have seen him and Sean butt heads at some point to make that. Maybe I could be wrong. They could have had a great relationship, but when you have a coach and an in-game leader like that, if they don't see eye to eye on the system, something's going to give somewhere. And more often than not, it's going to be the coach. That's just the way coaching is in Counter Strike right now. But either way, that's going to help Tyloo massively. One, and Lurpus alluded to this in a tweet that I made, is it takes time to do that. That's why I want to see this extend more than just these two games, because you have to break down bad habits, right? You have to change bad habits, and it's very difficult to change bad habits. It only happens over longer periods of time. So first he has to tell them what he's doing wrong, and then he has to get them to stop doing it, and then he has to like reprogram their thinking so that they do things the right way. Has to kind of shift it in the other direction. And that's something that he's going to be very good at because he is going to be a little bit more of a dictator. He doesn't want to put up with kind of bad plays for very long. That's where we've seen some of the friction in the past is when maybe some of the star players are making plays that in his brain the theoretical way that he thinks about Counter Strike aren't the best to make. So um, being able to break that down for the Tyloo players and then give them the kind of the right option and steer them in that course, I think we can see improvements there. And then the other thing that I think he will be very good on um, is the sense that he has this kind of idea of how he wants to play Counter Strike. You can think whatever you want about his style of Counter Strike, whether you like it or not. But he's going to come in and on top of that strict discipline, he's saying, "This is how we play the game. This is how I'm going to teach you how to play the game, and you are going to play this way, and it will be successful." Um, and like I said, it doesn't matter if you agree with that kind of style or if you don't agree with that kind of style. What matters is that you have the five players believing it or like running that style. If five players playing the wrong brand of Counter Strike is much better than two people playing the right brand and three people playing the wrong brand, or right and wrong, however you see it. But when you have five people playing the same system, that's where you can kind of see where you need to make changes, what kind of tools you need, what kind of role this player is going to fit into it. That's where you can kind of shift and adjust who's doing what for the team. But the sense that he's going to get these guys marshaled up and kind of all playing the same way, because right now Tyloo doesn't have an identity as a team. They have a lot of skill. We know they have a lot of skill, but they still struggle with finding opening kills. They still struggle with kind of the default setups. Still very much struggle with the coordinations on when they hit bomb sites and when they make certain moves on different sides of the map. And that's all things that Peacemaker can help out with, especially considering over in China they don't seem to have anyone with that knowledge, or over in Asia in general to begin with. I know Blez talked about that. They don't really have a lot of that experience they'll bring in. That's why Rambo's been the coach of Project KR, and we saw them at Kiev do a pretty cool job, like pretty impressive for their kind of level, with how they thought about the game and how they theorized and how they kind of executed things. Even if they don't have the skill to really pull it off against the best teams in the world, it was very cool to see them thinking the right way, and that's what Peacemaker can provide Tyloo over time, is that kind of structure, is that kind of proper thought process, is to kind of start breaking down some of the bad habits and then rebuilding them into good ones. And like we said, that or like I said, that just takes a longer period of time than just two tournaments. So for these, I don't think we can. I'm personally not going to necessarily judge Peacemaker off how Tyloo does at these two events, just because. I mean, I think PGL just came out and said he can't coach from behind him anyway, so it's not like he can call a timeout and change something up in the middle of a match. It's basically going to be like, this is what this team does on this map. This is where you're going to find some openings. This is maybe something you can adjust to. If you see these things coming, this is what's happening. And that's going to be very, very difficult for Tyloo to kind of take all these factors into account leading into a match on such short notice. So again, he probably won't have the impact that we're all hoping for in those first two events. It's all about if he impresses them enough to give him a long-term contract, and then we'll start to be able to see it. And then just Peacemaker generally as a coach, he strikes me if like with like kind of what we saw out of Tempo Storm, bringing them kind of or helping to bring them out of like obscurity into winning these two big events and kind of putting their name on the map. With Team Liquid, kind of bring them to the grand finals of a major. We haven't really seen anything after that, but he kind of strikes me as someone, if you take into account some of the personality clashes he's had over the years with some of the star players, he strikes me as like in basketball there are coaches over in North America where um, phenomenal college coaches for the NCAA, but like if you put them on a pro team, they won't have that same kind of success. There's always it's in the NFL as well. Is you can coach a college team with the style of ball that they play, or the style of players that they have, but once you get to the pros, it's a completely different game. And Peacemaker kind of strikes me at the moment as that coach who can bring lift a team from like down low to like here, but not fully to the professional level, where I still think he sometimes struggles with the professional teams, mostly the managing of the personalities, right? That's the kind where it feels like he drops the ball with all the different things that we've heard, all the different arguments we've heard of him have with Simple, with Elige. Pimp, I know, has had some friction with him. Haven't heard too much come out of the OpTic side of things, but you have to imagine there were some personal issues there just by how quick that went. Um, Someone who when he learns to manage personalities, when he learns to be able to get his point across and be able to make people believe in his kind of system, that's going to help him immensely as a coach. But there's no denying his knowledge of the game and what he's able to do when he can when he can lead and when he can actually have his system start to be implemented. We've seen it with Liquid. We saw it with Tempo Storm. Didn't get to see that in Energy, obviously. Didn't get to see that in OpTic, who didn't seem very very open to kind of adjusting to his style of play. And obviously in Misfits, I think that was the big mismanagement of his, to kind of end his stint there before it even really began. Saw some kind of touches of it, but still, over in China with Tyloo, if he has a long period of time, he's gonna have the opportunity. The Chinese players, the Asian players will more than likely want to buy into his system as the most experienced person in the region when it comes to CS:GO, with some of the most accomplishments they're going to have in the region. I think the players are going to listen to him immensely. I think they're going to do whatever he tells them to do because they have the skill. It's about now finding some kind of structure, building some kind of a team, building some kind of a mindset of how to play. And I think that's the most important thing that Peacemaker can bring. I personally think this is a really, really cool move if Peacemaker gets a long-term contract with Tyloo.